This is the Tuesday, October 11th, 2022 meeting of the Select Board pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021. On June 16th, 2021, Governor Baker signed into law an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until March 31st of 2023 of remote meeting provisions of his March 12th, 2020 order. The October 11th, 2022 Select Board meeting is being conducted remotely via board participation, and I am granting permission to Westwood Media Center to record the meeting and asking, is there anyone else wishing to record the meeting? Seeing none, going to jump into our chairman's update. Westwood Day 2022 was about as perfect as it gets, and it was a huge success. Thank you to all residents who came out and ran the road race, attended the fun run. The vendor village was packed. There were lots of folks in line for the food. And it was great to see so many residents out there enjoying the activities and the beautiful weather. We were joined by our district representatives, Congressman Stephen Lynch, Senator Michael Rush, Representative Paul McMurtry, all of whom were there to welcome residents to this wonderful community event. I would be remiss if I didn't give special recognition to the many wonderful sponsors for their support for Westwood Day. There were platinum sponsors, Iron Tree Services, Ira Motor Group, Amoresco, gold sponsors of Daily Foot Care and the Tinsley Team Real Estate, silver sponsors, Arch Orthodontics, Beth Israel Deaconess, Clean Portable Restrooms, Dedham Savings, Fox Hill Village, Needham Bank, Roach Brothers, Rockland Trust, University Station, and our bronze sponsors, Alltown, Courtyard Marriott, Dental Arts of Westwood, Dunkin' Donuts on High Street and Washington Street and Providence Highway, Frugal Fanny's Fashion Warehouse, Fidelity Investments, the Goddard School, Mass General Brigham, Mayor Realty Group, Members Plus Credit Union, Northeast Securities, Orange Theory Fitness, Poirier Sales and Service, Prevet Oil Company, Westwood Dentistry, and Westwood Minute. And a very special thanks to the Westwood Recreation Commission members, the Rec Department staff, and all the many volunteers who dedicated their time and energy to that day. The Recreation Department gets a special shout out. It takes months of hard work, organization, and planning to pull this event off as successfully as they did. And your hard work showed beautifully on the 17th. So well done, Rich, Sue, Joe, Kerry, Holly, Brian, and Angela. Looking ahead to a schedule of upcoming meetings. Tomorrow night is maybe one of the busier nights in town. We have the Westwood Environmental Action Committee hosting a virtual community engagement session on solar phase 2. That is tomorrow night, October 12th from 7 to 8 p.m. Residents are encouraged to learn about the locations for phase 2 solar, benefits to the town and schools, and some of the timelines and renderings. You can find more information on the town website. Is that meeting in person, Chris or Tish? And if so, where? And if not, is it on Zoom?
It's on Zoom.
It's on Zoom. Okay. All right. The Charter Review Committee has a public meeting coming on October 19th, and they will be at 7 p.m. in the Gillette Meeting Room in the Westwood Police Station. And while all the Charter Review Committees are open to the public and attendance is welcome, this is a particular time that's been reserved to solicit input from interested members of the community on the town's charter. On October 17th, the Westwood Cultural Council is seeking applications to fund local community cultural programs. Any individuals or organizations may apply for projects such as workshops, lectures, exhibitions, and performing art projects. All applications must be completed online and are due by October 17th, 2022. Visit our town website for more information on the Westwood Cultural Council application. And finally, for the chairman's update, I have the dubious honor of recognizing that our beloved town finance director, Pam Dukeman, will be retiring on October 21st. This is her last select board meeting as a town employee. She has provided invaluable insight, guidance, leadership to town residents, town staff, the select board during her 31 years of town service. She's been an integral role in the financing of almost every major capital project in town, from Westwood High School to the Senior Center, Thurston Middle School, the modular classrooms there, our main library, the Islington Fire Station, the police station, and the newly broken ground Hanlon Deerfield Elementary School. Pam always presented the budget in a way that delivered, consistent resident confidence in her knowledge and command of subject and expertise on our finances. And she has built and managed a highly qualified financial team with exceptional professionalism. She will be greatly missed. Pam, I encourage as many people as they can to go to the event we have recognizing her at the public library on October 20th, on the evening of October 20th. I believe that's at 6 p.m., correct, Tish?
No, it's 4.
4, sorry.
After 4 p.m.
Sorry. So, Pam, thank you for everything for all these 31 years.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those kind words. I've certainly enjoyed always working with the select board members, current members and past over these many years. The town has been so fortunate to have such wonderful residents step up to serve on our boards. I really hope the town recognizes, all the work that our elected officials do in volunteering their time to take on this important role. It's been a pleasure to work with you throughout all these years.
Now, I know we're not letting you go easy. I know you've got a heavy part of the agenda tonight, so we thank you in advance for that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Just Marianne, Michael, anything you'd like to say to Pam?
Oh, I think I've said it enough. She's getting tired of hearing it from me, Rob. So
Very good.
I will have more to say to Pam at the time of her retirement party, and I look forward to that, Pam. But thank you.
Very good. So moving from the chairman's update to scheduled action. I believe we have Nora here for a one-day special all alcohol license for an event that will be held, an Oktoberfest event that will be held by the Sheehan PTA at Hale Reservation. So am I correct?
Yes,
We have Nora here. You want to elaborate for us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We also have Suzanne Insler, who is the applicant from the Sheehan PTA. The event is an Oktoberfest. It's a Sheehan fundraiser, a ticketed event, and scheduled for Saturday, October 22nd from 5 to 10 p.m. at Cat Rock Field at Hale Reservation. The plan is to have a DJ, music, games, food. There'll be a pizza food truck. I think there was an early flyer that mentioned a bonfire, but Chief Deckers has determined that due to the continuing drought conditions, a bonfire is not permitted. But all the other activities are allowed. The Alcohol Beverage Control Commission allows nonprofits to apply for a one-day all alcohol license. So that's what this application is for. It's been reviewed by the Alcohol Review Committee. We looked at the applicant's use of the Boston Best Bartending Service and received tips certified cards from each of the servers that are going to be serving that night. And the Alcohol Review Committee voted unanimously to recommend the Select Board's approval of the one-day license, subject to the issuance of a food permit to the food vendor. And I can tell you that the food vendor, Blazing Hearth Pizza Truck, has since received its food permit. So everything is good to go on our end, and we recommend that the board grant approval.
Questions from either of my colleagues? Marianne, you're on mute.
Thanks, Rob. I have no questions.
Mr. Chairman, I believe that Mr. Walsh has recused himself from this matter and left the meeting for a minute.
Very good. Then I will entertain a motion from Ms. LeBlanc Cummings.
Yes, I move that the Select Board grant approval of the Sheehan PTA one-day special all alcohol license on October 22nd, 2022, with the following: for alcohol to be served from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. and to allow for the setup time and cleanup time for alcohol on the premises from 12 p.m. to 11 p.m. and for the electronic signature of the select board third member to be affixed to October 22nd, 2022, Sheehan PTA one-day all special, all alcohol license.
And I will second that out of necessity. Roll call vote, Ms. LeBlanc Cummings.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. So this passes.
Let the record show that Mr. Walsh was as abstained or was not present.
Very much.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good luck. I hope you have as beautiful a day as we had for Westwood Day.
Me too. Thank you guys so much.
All right. Moving on to the next scheduled item. Town Clerk Dottie Powers is here to give us an update on the voting options that are coming for the November 8th, 2022 state election. Welcome, Dottie.
Thank you, Chairman Gotti and select board members. So we've got a big election coming up. November 8th is the state election, and our polling places will open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. for any of those registered voters that want to vote on election day, and all voting will take place at the high school and the gymnasium. Now, there are quite a few options to vote for people that do not want to go out on election day. The Secretary of State's office has mailed out vote by mail postcards. They did that in July and again in September. So we have applications on file. If for some reason you may think that we don't have your application, give us a call. We can direct you. We could mail you one or direct you how to apply for a ballot. It's actually pretty easy. You can go on the Secretary of State's website now and apply. We just received the ballots. We have right now over 3,000 applications. We received the ballots yesterday, and we've processed one precinct today. So that's over 700 ballots that went out in the mail today. So everybody should be expecting their ballots if you have already requested them by the end of the week or the beginning of next week. We're working really diligently, the staff here, to get those out to residents. And the next way that you could vote, if not by mail, we'll have early voting in person. That's going to be for 2 weeks. That will be held on September 22nd. That will start, and that will go through November 4th. That will take place in the Gillette Meeting Room at the Westwood Police Station, 588 High Street. And we do have the hours and the information on the website. If you just go to the Town of Westwood's website and right on the top header, it's November 2022 election information. Everything is there. There's a ballot. There's also a link if you want to check to see the status of your absentee ballot, if it's your vote by mail ballot, if it's been mailed. Another really important thing that everybody should consider is if you're new to town, you've just moved here, or you're not registered to vote, the deadline to register voters is November 12th. October 29th is a deadline to register voters. The town clerk's office will be open from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. for anybody that wants to register in person. You can also register online going to the Secretary of State's website. You do need to have a Massachusetts ID issued by the Registry of Motor Vehicles, however, in order to register online. You can also come into the town clerk's office. You can register in person, or you can give us a call and we can mail you out an application. So those applications have to be postmarked by the deadline in order for you to be eligible to vote on November 8th. The deadline for the vote by mail is, that deadline is going to be 5 p.m. on November 1st to request a ballot. And that again, you can send them in, or you can do that, apply online. Now, for those of you that are voting by mail, the deadline for us to receive the ballots, you should make every effort to get those ballots back to us by the close of polls on election day, which is November 8th. For those of you, there's a few different choices in getting them back to us. You can bring them to the town clerk's office. You can put them in the secure ballot box, which is located in front of the police station, or you can mail them. If you do mail them, they have to be postmarked by on or before 8 p.m. November 8th. And because it's a state election, the state does allow those ballots to come in 3 days, within 3 days after the election, which happens to fall on a holiday, Friday, the 11th of November. So we can receive these by U.S. postal mail up until 5 p.m. on Saturday, the 12th. We will stop processing all the vote by mail ballots that we receive. Those are going to be processed in advance. Those will be processed on November, those are going to be processed on Saturday, November 5th. And that's for all vote by mail ballots that we received through November 4th. That will be open to the public. We will begin that at 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, the 5th, and that will be at Town Hall in the lower level meeting room. And any ballot that we receive after Friday that we don't process on Saturday will go to the polls on election night to be processed. So there's quite a few dates in there, but for any clarification, everything is on the website. Just go to the voting and election page. If you have any questions about early voting, voting in person, just feel free to give us a call, and we're more than happy to answer any questions for you.
Thank you so much, Dottie. I believe you also need us to sign and post the warrant.
Yes.
Okay, so
Mr. Chair, can I just a clarification?
Certainly.
So
Yeah.
Dottie, I may have misinterpreted or misunderstood what you said, but going back to the early voting schedule, I
Yes.
just want to make sure I understand this. So that's from Saturday, October 22nd
Yes.
through Tuesday, November 1st, excluding the Sundays. Is that correct?
No, that's Friday, November 4th.
Friday, November 4th? The early
Yes.
voting dates?
Yes.
Yes, that's early
Okay.
voting in person. And
Okay.
that, yes, there's no.
Oh, from November 4th, I'm sorry, yes.
Yeah.
So from Saturday, October 22nd to Friday, November 4th, excluding the Sundays.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And the last day to register to vote will be on October 29th. So that's a really important date for residents as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Darren.
You're welcome. And that, and Chairman Gotti, the warrant will be posted by our Constable Sergeant Paul Sicard, and that will be posted in 5 public places equally distributed among the 5 precincts and also online.
thank you, Dottie. So are there any questions from my colleagues?
No.
And I would entertain a motion.
I move the select board sign and post the November 8th, 2022 state election warrant, and for the warrant to be posted by the constables throughout the town and online on the town website as well.
I second that.
Okay, roll call vote. Ms. LeBlanc Cummings,
Aye.
Mr. Walsh,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you, Dottie.
You're welcome. Actually, I just want to clear one thing up with Chris. Chris, you mentioned November 1st. I think what that date was is the deadline for to request a vote by mail ballot.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, at our last meeting, we mentioned that Town Treasurer Jim Galvin is resigning effective September 15th, 2022. And we are looking to appoint a temporary town officer. And so we have those powers per the town charter, and I would like to believe that we have a proposed action to appoint someone who is very familiar to the town. Chris, would you like to give some more background on that, please?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so Pam Dukeman and I had a conversation as with the board discussion at your meeting regarding the resignation of a longtime treasurer, elected treasurer Jim Galvin. And the recommendation that we have to the board this evening, after careful discussion, they're very pleased with his willingness to do so, is to recommend to the board Phil Shapiro. Phil has served the town in a variety of capacities very well. He is very willing. We're very supportive of, we're very thankful for his support in this regard, and also of our finance team.
Do I have,
I don't know if there's anything more, Pam, you'd like to add?
Yes, as you mentioned, Phil has served in many, many roles for the town, including serving on the Finance and Warrant Commission. He served as a Board of Assessors member for a number of years, and then he also was on the Select Board for a number of years, as well as many various committees, Long Range Financial Planning Committee, also served on the OPEB task force and other things as needed. So he's long been a terrific member of town government. He also is very familiar with a lot of what our treasurer's role does, as Phil in his prior private work experience ran the New England office of Standard & Poor's. So he's very familiar with municipal bonding and debt financing, and that's very important to us. So we're thrilled to have Phil step forward, and we're very, very thankful for Jim Gavin for all of the work that he's done with us. It's been a very active 20 years of borrowing, as you mentioned, all those wonderful buildings that the town has done. It's been tremendous, and he has played such a significant role in that for us, and it's been wonderful.
thank you, Pam. And I couldn't agree with you more, both on, the service that Jim has provided and how fortunate we are to have, the bench strength in town in terms of talent willing to step forward as Phil. So with that, I will turn to my colleagues and ask if there are any questions regarding this.
I have none, Rob, to be honest with you, so.
No questions,
All
just
right,
gratitude.
Okay, I move that the select board appoint Phil Shapiro to serve as the interim town treasurer, effective October 14th, 2022, to serve until April 25th, 2023, at the annual town election. Now, maybe, should I just ask town council, Pat, should be until the day of town meeting, actually? Because it won't be sworn into office until the day of town meeting.
Yeah, it has to be, at this point in time, it has to be to the conclusion of town meeting.
Okay. So I would amend that motion that Phil should serve as interim town treasurer until the close of town meeting.
I second that.
Okay, roll call vote. Ms. LeBlanc Cummings,
Aye.
Mr. Walsh,
Aye.
and I vote aye as well. Thank you very much, Jim, for all your years of service. And thank you very much, Phil, for your willingness to step up. Okay, the next thing is we have an update on the OPEB liability and our progress towards that, and based on most recently completed actuarial reports. So I believe this is part of the Pam Dukeman swan song here. So I believe Kathy Riley may also be here as well. So I will turn it over to the two of you.
Rob, can I just mention one thing right now? I got a couple emails from some residents. Right now, they're having an issue with the streaming provider, so this meeting is not being streamed on our cable channels, but it's on YouTube right now. So Andrew might be able to elaborate, but residents can watch it on the YouTube, but it's not in our cable channels right now, so they're working on that.
And that's is that with just one of the two providers, or is it on both providers?
Andrew, do you know if it's both providers or just one? I think it's Comcast right now. I can find out.
All right, and maybe somebody text Melinda in the background and see what's going on. Okay.
Sorry, we're working on it, something wrong with the streaming, but it's on YouTube right now currently.
Okay. All right. So with that duly noted, I'm going to turn it back over to Pam and Kat.
Great, thank you. Yes, we're going to provide the board an update on where we stand with our OPEB liability compliance. I was just going to do a very, very brief update of what the town's efforts have been with OPEB over the last several years. And then we would have Kathy Riley, who's the vice president from Siegel, who performs our actuarial liability. She will go through the most recent results with the board. But if I can just share my screen very briefly. And can you see that? Okay. And just very quickly, just a reminder that when we talk about OPEB, that's the unfunded liability for our employee post-retirement benefits, particularly the health insurance. Historically, in the past, Westwood and other government entities nationwide did not properly fund the benefits in a timely manner. That did create large liabilities for those communities. We are now required to have that liability analysis performed every other year. We have been doing that since 2006. We must also disclose those results and our status now in our annual financial statements. We must also file that report with the state PERAC, the State Retirement Administration Commission. So we are in full compliance with all of that, having our liability done every other year, disclosing that, filing with PERAC. There is currently, as the board is aware, no requirement to fund towards that liability. But at this point, if we did not, the liability would continue to grow. It would have enormous negative impact on future budgets, and it would have a negative impact on our bond rating. Our most recent liability was performed with the measurement date as of June 30th, 2021, and that's what you'll look at tonight. I do just want to mention that all of the reports we have every other year, as well as a little summary that we do, is on the town's website. We also include that summary in the finance section in the back of that town meeting book that goes out to all our residents. So we're always trying to disclose and make sure people are aware of where we are with this issue. Just quickly, what the town has done, the town has made great progress on this in a couple of different areas. One is controlling the liability from the expense side, so looking at the cost of our health insurance, and the select board took two major steps with that. One was transitioning our health insurance program to the state GIC program that occurred in FY15. And then we had back in FY14, we eliminated what became a redundant Medi-B reimbursement payment to our retirees. Both of those had a very positive impact on the overall liability. Second, this chart shows our annual funding. Way back in, I guess now 10, 11 years ago, we were talking OPEB. We had taken some good steps. We had set up a trust account. We were putting very little money towards that because we weren't able to. As we made some changes, as the board made changes with our health insurance plan, we took those budget savings and put them towards the OPEB liability. So we were able, in two kind of big areas, able to increase what we were providing annually towards that liability. Now we are able to just do a small increase each year of about $25,000 to keep us on track. In FY23, our budget shown in green, we are funding $1.5 million within our budget towards the OPEB liability. So after several years of very steady progress in that area, we're seeing the benefit of that in our overall liability. And then the third area in 2015, and this was something that Treasurer Gavin worked a lot on, and he was able to get done for us, was we changed how we were investing this money. Once we started accumulating real money, it became important to invest that and earn investment earnings on that money. The state had an option that allowed towns to invest their money with the state PRIM, the Pension Reserve Investment Management Board. That's a state agency that is set up only to invest for the retirement, the state retirement, other retirement systems. The state allowed them to carve out a little OPEB area of that and allows communities to invest through them. So we've been doing that since 2015. So through these three different things, we've made great progress through our funding and our investment. The trust fund currently has a balance of about $18 million. And that was really, we thought we could never achieve that way back in these 2011 and 12 days. And I'm looking at select board member LeBlanc Cummings. She was on the FinCom at that time. It was, a lot of work by people to get going on this, to get started. And the town just really stayed at it and kept going. And now we're in a much, much improved position with that. I do think it's one of the great examples of really a cooperative effort amongst all our boards, our FinCom, our select board, our town meeting, to support this and really move us from what was kind of a major problem to, now we're well on our way. And then just finally, we, again, have made great progress. The town has remained disciplined and steady on all areas. And this chart just shows the progress each year from kind of what the liability was and how that's been able to decline. And this is just a chart that we do put in our material when I mentioned that summary material. So great progress by the town over a number of years. And now we'll have, again, Kathy Riley, the vice president from Siegel, who performs our liability. She is considered the guru in the state on OPEB. She really is. And she's spoken to the town before. She came out to the select board and the Finance and Warrant Commission years ago when we were on that path of trying to get started, trying to help people understand just what the whole thing was about and kind of helping us get a plan in place. So we're delighted to have Kathy with us tonight to be able to update the board on our most recent study.
Thank you, Pam, and welcome, Kathy.
Great, thank you for having me. So I'm going to try and share my screen and open up the, hold on, cut all that up. There. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so as Pam said, we do a valuation for the town every other year, and this valuation was done as of June 30, 2021. We refer to this as your funding valuation, and we use the information in this report to measure how you're coming with respect to your goals to fully fund the obligation. So we have in this report what we refer to as a funding schedule. I'm a pension actuary by training, not a retiree health actuary. So I think of funding retirement systems and funding OPEB obligations in a similar manner, put together a schedule and measure your progress towards fully funding those obligations. And you guys are making great progress. This valuation is then used at the end of the fiscal year. So as of June 30, 2022, it will be used again as of June 30, 2023 to satisfy your accounting requirements. For your purposes, funding and accounting, because you are funding, are really kind of aligned, and you can monitor that progress. For some communities, it's really two very different issues. So when we do a funding valuation, we collect information on your participants, your retirees with health coverage, and also your active employees with health coverage, because we want to be able to predict not only the benefits you're paying to current retirees, but the benefits that you're going to pay to future retirees. With this most recent valuation, we saw an increase in the number of active participants with coverage from 415 participants to 434 participants, and a slight decrease in the number of retirees and beneficiaries with coverage from 419 down to 383. So those participants were the basis of the valuation. Any valuation, whether it's an OPEB benefit or a pension benefit, you need to project the benefits or the stream of payments that you're going to make to those retirees when they're in pay status. So for pensions, it's easy. You look at Chapter 32 and you look at participants' salary and years of service, and you figure out a pension, and they collect that pension for their lifetime. But with retiree health, it's a little bit more complicated. You have to look at the plans that you're offering, and typically you start by looking at claims experience, looking at aggregate claims experience to come up with average costs. And then you take those average costs and you age adjust them to take into account that people utilize different benefits as they age. They tend to use more medical benefits as they get older. And you take into account the different plans that are offered. Medicare plans are more costly. It's not that people use more benefits when they are I said Medicare, I meant to say the non-Medicare plans are more costly. And it's not because people use more benefits when they're younger. It's because Medicare subsidizes or pays for a significant portion of benefits once people become Medicare eligible and move over to a Medicare plan. So when we project out a stream of payments for retirees, we take into account that people use more benefits as they age, as they get from retirement up to age 65. There's a drop when Medicare kicks in and the town pays less, and the town and the retiree pay less, and then it continues to increase again going forward. The basis of that, as I said, typically would be claims experience. But since you participate in the GIC, we can't isolate your claims experience. What we do is, because you participate in the GIC, which is a much larger pool of eligible active employees and retirees, we rely on the analysis that is done by the state for the GIC retiree plans. The reason we do that, it's really not because, because it's easier. We really do that because that's what the actuarial standards of practice tell us that we should do, because you're part of this bigger pool and your premiums are based on this bigger pool. We should be using that analysis, not our own individual analysis of your experience to generate average costs. That is a difference with this valuation compared to the prior valuation, and it actually resulted in a pretty significant reduction in the average cost, which is why the liabilities came down a little bit with this valuation. And that's why I'm pointing out that nuance, because it was fairly significant on the impact on the liabilities. So once we have our participants and once we have our average benefits, then we just have to apply probabilities of how long they'll be paid. So how long people will live in retirement, and then how long people will be in retirement. So what age will they retire? Will they even make it to retirement? All those probabilities go into our determination of the liabilities. When we put all that together, we come up with the liabilities that are shown on page 12 of our valuation report. And when we think about funding liabilities for either a retirement system or an OPEB plan for the town of Westwood, there's two categories of liabilities. There are the liabilities that have already been earned, and there are the liabilities that are going to be earned in the future. So retirees' liabilities have been fully earned. We measured them at $16.4 million with this valuation compared to $21.2 million in the prior valuation. I'm going to go through the numbers, explain what they are, and then explain why they've changed from one year to the next. Then we looked at the active group, and again, we see a decrease in the liabilities here. They were $23 million in the prior valuation, $18.8 million in the current valuation. That combined amount, $35 million and change, represents the liabilities that have already been earned. We compare them to your assets, which at the beginning of fiscal 22 were $15.5 million, resulting in an unfunded liability of $19.8 million. So think of an unfunded liability as a mortgage. You have to come up with a plan to pay down that mortgage. And that's the first component of the funding schedule. The other component of the funding schedule, though, is your active employees continue to earn benefits while they're working for the town. We quantify that in row 7 of this table here. It's referred to as the normal cost, and it's the cost of funding the benefits that your employees earn in a current year. So your funding schedule has two components: a payment for your normal cost to keep current with benefits that are being earned in the current year, and a catch-up payment on the unfunded liability, kind of like a mortgage payment. Those two pieces together are what we refer to as the actuarially determined contribution. And for this valuation in row 9 on the table, we came up with a cost of $2.6 million, about a third less than the prior valuation at $3.7 million. What does that mean in a funding concept? Well, 2.6 is the amount of money that you would want to set aside to fund your benefits over a 24-year mortgage. I forgot to mention the term of the mortgage that we were using. And when we look at that payment on your unfunded liability and current costs, we also have to take into account that you're also you're currently paying benefits for your retirees out of your operating cash. You're not using your trust fund assets to pay existing retirees. So you get credit for those cash payments, benefit payments towards your actuarially determined contribution. And that's $1.6 million. Those are the projected benefits for this fiscal year. It's row 10 in the page that we're looking at. And then Pam said you're expected to budget about 1.5 million. Well, it's fiscal 23. It was a little under 1.5 million for fiscal 22. But you put those two pieces together and you're funding the schedule cost of the actuarially determined contribution for your OPEB obligation. I'm going to move the schedule ahead and show how we project out your liabilities, project out these payments, and show you how we put together a funding schedule and where it's expected to go in the future. So mentioned before that we had two components to the funding schedule, a normal cost and a payment on your unfunded liability. Those are shown in column 1 and 2 of this table. And the sum of those is your actuarially determined contribution shown in column 3. And it's $2.6 million for fiscal 22, the first row, and it's growing each year for 12 and 13 years out through 2033. We also talked about the benefits that you're paying to your retirees. You can see those in column 4, starting out at $1.6 million, but growing faster than the actually determined contribution because we take into account expected trend on your benefit payments, and trend for our assumed trend for this plan is about 7% per year for your Medicare plans, about 4% per year for I said that the other way around, sorry, 7% for the non-Medicare plans, about 4 to 4.5% for the Medicare plans. So you can see that's a much, how that plays out in the projection of benefits in column 4. Currently, as I said, you're paying for those benefits out of your operating cash. That's to the label paid by the town, as opposed to column 5, where we don't show any benefits being paid out of the trust. We also show in column 6 the contribution that you're making into the trust. It's just under 1.5 million for fiscal 22 and a little over 1.5 million for fiscal 23. You can see how it grows. You put the column 4 and column 6 together. That in column 7 is what your OPEB benefits are currently costing you. About $3.1 million this year. You can see it increasing. But what's interesting is if you look at how the assets and liabilities are growing, and those are shown in column 8 and 9, those assets were projected to be about $18 million at the end of fiscal 22. And that combination of putting in contributions of about 1.5 million, not drawing down benefit payments, the assets are assumed to grow at 6.5% per year. You can see 12, 13 years out, they're over $60 million. Your liabilities also grow as people continue to earn benefits, they age, those benefits are increasing. But if you follow this schedule out, you'll see that the assets are catching up with the liabilities. Column 10 is your unfunded liability. It's decreasing steadily, and it reaches 0 in fiscal 2034. 13 years out. That's 13 fiscal years out on this schedule. So in that last year, in fiscal 2034, when you eliminate that unfunded liability, you'll notice if you look at column 4 and 5, we've switched the benefit payments from being paid by the town to being paid out of the OPEB trust. Column 6 in that year is just the contribution to the trust is $3.6 million. So your contribution to the trust has actually jumped up, but you're taking benefit payments out of the trust that year, so that your combined cost has actually come down from the prior year. So you drop from $5 million contribution or total payments in 2033 to a $3.6 million payment in fiscal 2034. That's what we kind of think of as the transition year. By the time you get to fiscal 2035, again, assuming all assumptions are met each and every year, and this will be adjusted every other year, projected to be fully funded in 2035 when the payment drops down to the normal cost payment. So when you get to full funding, the cost doesn't disappear. You still have to continue to pay for the benefits that are being accrued by your active employees. But at that point in time, there's no payment on the unfunded liability. and you're paying benefits out of the trust. So you can see the advantage of getting that money into the trust and having the trust work for you. I'm going to pause for just a minute and see if there are any questions on this funding aspect, and then I'm going to take a step back and explain why what drove the big change in the numbers from the prior valuation to the current valuation.
So thank you, Kathy, very much. I don't have any questions per se, other than Pam, you sure you don't want to stick around until 2035 and take the victory lap there?
I was just going to say, it would be good to be a select board member in 2033, 35, because not only will we have ended the extra payments for the OPEB, but it's similar on our pension. We will have completed the extra catch-up unfunded liability on the pension side. It will be a very good year to be a select board member then.
And can I know I said it once, I'm going to say it again, especially with those comments. These numbers will change.
Yes.
They will change every time we do the valuation. They could go up a little bit, they could go down a little bit. That date could float a year or two, but you are making incredible progress towards funding these obligations. Back up 2 pages, 44% funded for OPEB benefits is pretty unusual. 44% funded plus a plan in place to get to full funding. That's where you want it. It's the plan as much as being at 44% funded right now.
Kathy, how does that put us with relative to other towns in the Commonwealth?
Better than most.
And if I could ask a question, maybe more for Pam. Pam, you went over the history of where we've been, and it's so exciting to see the end actually in sight. To what extent do you think our being this active on paying down the OPEB unfunded liability has contributed to our great bond rating?
Yes, it's a major piece. We stressed up front that it's still not a requirement to have to fund this. People could sit back and just wait. There were some communities in the state who said, well, we're going to deal with the pension liability first, and then we'll move to OPEB. It's one of the first questions we get asked during our credit review. They'll say, where are you with OPEB? And now, we kind of just send them the summary. They see our progress. It's been a major part. And I will say exactly what Kathy said. It's having the plan. We show them the schedule. This is what we're funding every year. We increase that by 25,000 each year. It keeps us steady with a little increase, but we have that now as a planned expense in our budget that our town meeting supports. It's really one of the first questions they ask, and I think it's been a major part of getting that bond rating. And those early years were difficult. It was difficult to educate people on what this was, to get the funding started. I think everyone was patient and kind of, just getting it started and moving it along. But once we kind of built in those payments and then getting it into the state for the longer term investment opportunity has been helpful too. So it's now become an easy thing to talk about during those credit reviews when, 10 years ago, that was difficult.
And just to reiterate, thank you, Pam, when we see those payments going up on the schedule, 10 or so years out, that's actually, as you pointed out, going to coincide with the mandatory payments toward the unfunded liability for the Norfolk retirement plan going away. We will be done, I believe, in 2030 with that liability. So that fixed cost will go away and could be allocated by some future select board to pay for that increased cost. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and I think what Kathy was pointing out is that when we'll make those higher payments, they'll come out of the trust that we've accumulated at that point. I mean, that's, yes, at a certain point we'll be paying for, cost from the trust that has been built up over that long period.
That's great. Thank you.
And don't forget, there will be a normal cost payment. There will be a payment at both retirement and OPEB, but it's much smaller than the aggregate of what you're paying now.
Yes,
Michael,
we have to make up for those past not doing the right thing in the past years. That piece will go away.
Yeah.
Michael, any questions for me?
I don't have any questions, Rob. I can just say this, though. I came from an MMA meeting today, and I think we're way ahead. Most towns are waiting for a bailout from the state. So it's really amazing to see the progress we've made. So I can tell you, I know Kathy says we're doing better than most. I think we're doing better than all, but that's her line of work, so I won't put those words in her mouth. But talking to select board members in cities and towns across the Commonwealth, we're way ahead.
Excellent. Now, Kathy, you were going to talk about the delta from 19 to 21?
Yes. So on page 12, you can see that the unfunded liability has dropped from 36 million to about 20 million. That's a bigger drop. Part of that is you look at the asset growth. The assets have gone from 8 million to 15 million. Part of the asset growth is the contributions you put in, but you also had some really good year in fiscal 21. Your fiscal 20 return on the assets was 2%, but your return in fiscal 21 was about 30%. So that certainly contributed to that drop in that unfunded. Now, not to pop the bubble a little bit, but I will pop the bubble a little bit. The fiscal 22 return, which we've already sent to Pam for the accounting disclosures, was about -4%. So, there will be volatility in these numbers. And to a certain extent, the more, as the assets get bigger and become a bigger percentage in your liability, the volatility in those assets will become bigger. They'll have more impact on the bottom line than they have historically. But again, it's better to have the assets to work with. But I'm going to move back a couple of pages in the report to page 6 in the valuation report, where we talk about the assumption changes we made, and we talk about the unfunded liability and how it changed from the prior valuation to the current valuation and the sources of those changes. So in the prior valuation, we had an unfunded liability of about $36 million. We actually expected it to increase a little over $1 million to $37.2 million. And if you drop to the bottom line, we see that we came in at just under $20 million, and that represented a gain of $17 million. The gains are the red negative numbers. That's the reductions in the unfunded liability. And some of them I think are a little bit intuitive. An experience gain, that's the changes in the demographics. So we had fewer retirees on the rolls, although we had more actives. So that's just maybe people retiring a little bit later than expected, maybe electing less expensive plans, or perhaps not living quite as long. It's a relatively small fluctuation over a 2-year period. Mentioned the investment gain of $2 million. That's when you take into account the 2% return for fiscal 20, which was less than the assumption, and the 30% return for fiscal 21. I mentioned that we assume medical costs will increase going forward. That's referred to as a trend assumption. We fine-tuned those trend assumptions with each valuation. The changes we made actually lowered liabilities by a relatively insignificant amount. The big number here is this $11 million labeled updating per capita costs and contributions. And that's what I meant before about looking at the GIC plans. Now, if you look at the GIC plans over the 2-year period from 19 to 21, the premiums didn't go up as much as expected. So some of this decrease is just that the GIC was either lucky, whether it was the GIC managing costs, and whether costs were a little bit lower over that 2-year period, or they were more effective at managing it, or they changed the plan provisions. All of those factors go into controlling costs. But we do feel that some of this decrease is due to using their methodology for calculating average costs rather than the methodology that we had used before, which just looked at your people and the premiums they were paying, as opposed to the big pool. We updated the mortality and the retirement assumptions, but again, pretty insignificant. We changed the Medicare enrollment assumption, which lowered costs a little bit too. So while almost all of your employees are in, when they turn age 65, are in a Medicare plan, there are some employees who are not eligible for Medicare. They just didn't have enough coverage with a prior employer, or they joined the town of Westwood before they were required to have coverage. We had an assumption that about 10% of your employees hired after 1986 would not have coverage. As we've looked at that assumption has gone away. there are fewer people affected by it. We just eliminated that assumption and it lowered the liabilities a little bit. And then we lowered the discount rate, and lowering the discount rate, as you can see, added some liability to the plan. But I want to talk a little bit about the discount rate. So when we do these funding valuations, we have to discount those future payments at an assumed rate of return. And the rate of return that we use is the assumed rate of return on your assets. That's how you calculate an actuarially determined contribution for this purpose. So we're looking at the expected rate of return on your assets, which we lowered from 7% to 6.5%. Your assets are invested with the PRIT fund. So you actually, even though you have, relatively speaking, a small pool of assets, you're able to take care of the broad diversification that the PRIT fund portfolio offers you. You've probably read or heard a lot about the assumptions that retirement systems are using to fund their liabilities. This is what we're talking about, the expected return on the PRIT assets. Expected return on assets over the last 10 years have come down considerably, probably from an average of over 8% down to about 7%, which is where a lot of the very large statewide plans are with respect to the assumption on their rate of return on assets. That assumption is a balance, is a blend of asset allocation, expectations about that those returns, and a little bit of risk, because there isn't one right answer about the expected return that a portfolio will generate. There's a range of reasonable answers, and part of that risk analysis is where do you want to be on that range of reasonable assumptions or reasonable expectations on what your assets will return. A lot of the pension valuations that we did this year, we're using an assumption pretty close to 7%. Most of my retirement systems are at 7, maybe a handful might be a little over 7, and some are starting to move under 7%. 7% is not an unreasonable assumption for a system or OPEB assets invested in the PRIT fund, but 6.5 is a little bit more conservative. You're a little bit more likely to make a 6.5% return assumption than you are a 7% return assumption. So we thought this was a good opportunity to lower the assumption and to take the hit, so to speak, on the liabilities, because you have this other favorable experience to offset it. So we've reset the assumption to 6.5%. It feels like a pretty comfortable place to be. You know, ultimately, when you get closer and closer to full funding, you might want to be even a little bit closer so that you're likely to see less volatility, or more likely to, meet the assumption and potentially consider different asset allocations if they're offered by the PRIT fund that would be maybe a little less volatile, maybe return a little bit less, but it'll be a little bit less volatile, so that when you reach that full funding state, you can be more confident that you'll stay there. So those are the key things in this valuation report, which is posted online. Here's a development of your assets over the 2-year periods. You can see the contributions and the investment component at $3.5 million for fiscal 2021. Again, I think that covers most of it. I guess I just want to say one more time, we think the projections are based on reasonable assumptions, but those projections are very dependent on experience equaling those assumptions. There will be variations. We already know we're going to see some asset volatility in the next year with the next cycle of valuation. So with that, I'll stop talking.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And Pam, just a quick question for the two of you, actually. When that assumption of the 6.5% was lowered from 7, that is something that we make a determination on. It's not something that's set at the state GIC level, or is it? So, okay, so this is consistent with, our history of taking a more conservative view on these types of things.
Yes, Kathy will recommend as she's doing it, what she's been seeing with other clients. We've been trying to make the effort. I think even just a couple of years back in that first chart I showed, 2-3 years back, we might have been up at 7.5, 7.7. So Kathy will recommend, and as she said, this is the year that you should, pull that down. It's a good opportunity to do so. And we will do that before she issues the final valuation.
Thank you very much. Turning to my colleagues, any questions for Kathy?
No, I don't have any. Thank you.
No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the detailed review. And Pam, as always, thank you.
Thank you. And again, it's been a tremendous effort by the town, so many various boards to get here. It's been a long time coming, but at least we're in a good point for the years moving forward. Thank you, Kathy.
Great, thank you. I'm going to drop off. Thank you.
You stop sharing your screen would be great. Yep, thank you so much.
Continuing on with Pam, I know you have a financial update relative to the closeout of fiscal year 22
Yes.
and other things.
Just going to share one other screen here. I will go through this quickly, but we always come into the select board at this time of year to review with you how we ended the last fiscal year and just to talk about some financial indicators, kind of where do we currently stand, just to get you ready for your next budget year that will be starting soon. At this time of the year, we are working on 3 financial years. FY22, we're closing out that year that ended on June 30th. We have a lot of compliance with the state, the Department of Revenue and the Education Department by our town and school finance people. We get our free cash certified by the fall each year with Department of Revenue, and we undergo our audit. So we have an on-site audit that was completed earlier this fall. We have to have our financial statements completed and issued by December 31. We have already had our audit team has met with our audit committee. That's a 3-member board appointed by the select board, and they will come in and report to you later in your schedule. So closing out 22, there are some pieces still in our current year, FY23, that are being worked on. It is only in the fall that we're finalizing the property values. It's usually the October and November timeframe where the assessors are working on that. They have to get final approval from DOR for all of that. And that does include the final new growth for FY23. So those values would be as of January 1, 2022, and then any new based on sales from calendar year 2021, and then any new growth through June 30th. And then you also, a big piece of completing kind of our current year 23 is to set the tax rate. So at your meeting the first week in November, your first meeting in November, you'll hold that classification hearing where you determine what the shift will be, the allocation among our residential and commercial property. Then we get the tax rate approved by Department of Revenue, and our actual FY23 tax bills get mailed out January 1. And then kind of while that's going on, we're starting the FY24, our next year's budget process. And just quickly with that 24 budget, the key deadlines, obviously we kind of work backwards. Next May 1, 2023 is when our town meeting will vote on the budget. By charter, the select board needs to come out with the budget 90 days before that. And so we always use the February 1 date for that, no matter what actual date town meeting may fall, the first or a little bit later. And then from our charter, it says that the FinCom has to review that budget as presented by the select board and have hold a public hearing on that at least 14 days prior to town meeting. So we will go into FinCom after the select board comes out with the February budget, make a presentation to them. They typically have hearings at the beginning and end of March in order to get that material prepared and out to the community in time before town meeting. So really for the select board between now and January 31 to meet that February deadline, you're looking at the budget at a lot of your meetings, looking at the operating and capital budgets, looking at financial projections, looking at revenue projections, state aid, all of that. So pieces will come before you for the next several months. On February 1, you're making a recommendation at that point. You continue to review to see things that may change between February and those hearings at the end of March, even up to town meeting. And then at the town meeting, it is the select board who's authorized to present the budget to town meeting for their approval. So just quickly, usually in October at this meeting, you're looking at the year-end close. We're going to give you a quick status of where we stand with free cash reserves, hotel meal tax. At the November 7th meeting, as I mentioned, you'll do the tax classification hearing to get the FY23 tax rate set. We usually then take all of that material that you've reviewed and present to the FinCom in the fall and go through with that so that they're up to speed on all of this. And then, as I mentioned, at your upcoming meetings in November and December, you'll be presented with all of what's being looked at for operating and capital budgets. Again, getting ready to put that budget out on February 1. Just looking forward now on where we are, it's important to recommend that the select board has really, what you've recommended for budgets and that our FinCom and town meeting has approved are very structurally sound budgets. And that is so important. Really, we've seen the benefit of that over the last couple of years with COVID and disruption and economic downturn. It really makes the difference in our finances. It's budgeting properly. When we do that, then you'll see good results. So structurally sound budgets. We don't have any one-time subsidies. We're not funding our ongoing budgets with any one-time revenue. We're always conservative in the revenue projections. An example of that is the meal and hotel tax revenue that our select board set that up to be, it's segregated into a separate account, not part of our general fund. That was a major difference that we had with some, in comparison to some other communities during the last couple of years with COVID, because that meal and hotel tax fund did take a hit during that time. Our town meeting has very purposely built reserve funds over the last several years to appropriate targets. So we are structured that we can maintain our essential services during a rainy day disruption. So it's really in the structurally sound budget that has set up so much of our financial stability. Looking at FY22, the year ended fine. Revenue closed out smoothly. All of our revenue projections on target, no disruptions. Hotel meal tax been down a little bit, as I mentioned, during COVID, started to rebound in 22. Expenditures were all in line. Departments worked very hard to remain within their budgets. Anything that needed an adjustment or transfer was done either by a town meeting transfer or a select board transfer. So FY22 closed out very smoothly. Just looking quickly at some of those pieces, first on the revenue side. So the final FY22 budget was $108 million in revenue. The pie chart shows the various pieces of that. As shown in blue, as we talk about all the time, 80% of our revenue comes from our tax base. That's a difficult model to budget on and run programs on, but it's a more reliable model when we look at what were actual collections. Our tax collections are very consistent year to year. Taxes are a very reliable source of revenue. We take in about 99% of taxes timely by June 30th. That is a standard collection rate for a suburban community like Westwood, who primarily has kind of owner-occupied residential housing. But obviously, where our major source of revenue is reliable, we have terrific collections. That sets the whole tone for our financial operations. Just a couple of quick things. Looking at taxes, as of June 30th, our total past due outstanding taxes $398,000. That's a cumulative amount. That's not for 1 year. So we're billing $80 million a year in taxes, and all we have past due is about $398,000. So again, we thank our residents for their timeliness with this and our staff in those departments who are working on the collections. That's an excellent number. Compares with an FY21, that number was a little bit higher at $727,000, the year before $470,000. Some of our collection processes were put on hold during COVID. Some of the state laws were put on hold, but we saw that number come down again as COVID passed and we could move forward with some of those collections. We also have on June 30th about $540,000 in tax deferral outstanding. Again, a very small number compared to what we're collecting. That's our senior program where eligible seniors can elect to defer their taxes until they sell their home. Excellent program for our seniors to participate in. It's an excellent program. We have about 540,000. That's about the level we've had the last couple of years. New people enter the program each year, and others as they move out of town. We get the payoffs for those past due taxes. So no problem there, and a wonderful program for our residents. Next revenue, state aid, $6.6 million in FY22. The main piece of that is our Chapter 70 education aid. 5.7 million of that total is in that one category. It's about 6% of our total revenue budget. And you can see in FY23, we expect that to be about 6.9 million. Just looking back, this chart shows you a long-term history of our state aid. In recent years, we've had very steady state aid. No significant increases each year, but also no disruption. Even during those years with COVID, the state, as some of you will remember being on the board at that time, came out very early and said, we are not going to cut state aid no matter what happens to the state budget. We received all payments, so it's been very steady. No mid-year cuts. We now receive state aid monthly, so it's been a very reliable source of revenue for the town. One more look at revenue, the local receipts category. That's for collections we make at the local level, primarily our motor vehicle excise tax, and then any fees and user fees that we collect. The total collections in local receipts were 5.8 million in FY22, consistent with last year, about 5.6 million. They exceeded what we budgeted by 1.6 million. This is an area where we're very conservative with our budget estimates, so that we build in room that if there was any kind of fluctuation in collections, our budgets will still remain intact. Again, motor vehicle is the largest category. The green here shows, the bar chart shows what we've collected for the past several years in motor vehicle excise. So 3.4 million in FY22. So again, the bulk of our local receipts at 5.8 is in this one category, motor vehicle excise, and it's been relatively stable for the last several years. Just quickly looking at the hotel and meals tax revenue, as I mentioned, our select board recommended and town meeting approved back in 2017 that revenue go into a separate fund, not in our general fund. It then takes town meeting vote to utilize that money. Our town meeting has really only used that for capital projects each year, not operating budget. There's a list here of some of the projects that our most recent town meeting did, some townwide project for recreation, important work, the DPW, the library parking lot that if you drove down High Street, you can see they're working on today. That was funded with the meal and hotel tax revenue, as well as a large network project that the schools needed. These two bar charts show you our annual collection total for the meals on the left and the hotel on the right. The last bar in blue was FY22. So the meals, we collected 462,000 in FY22. You can see the disruption that occurred from COVID. We only collected, it dropped down to 331,000 in FY21. Similar on the hotels, 269,000 in 22. Again, there was a great disruption there during COVID. The bar in green, we've received our first quarter for FY23. So on a quarterly basis, if we project that out, we are looking that the meal and hotel tax revenue has returned to kind of our pre-COVID levels. But this volatility is exactly why this goes into a separate account, not part of our operating budget. This, again, during those years, we were selling a lot of debt during the COVID years and getting credit review. This was something that we were able to show that, again, other towns had problems with because they were taking these revenue hits and it was being used to fund their, ongoing teachers and public safety staffing, and they were running into problems. The balance in the account on June 30th, $1.2 million. Quickly on the expense side, so our total expense budget in FY22, $101 million. Very consistent year. Less COVID impact than in 21. Everything closed out fine. Our budget in blue is our school budget, is the largest piece, municipal budget in red, and then the yellow piece is our insurance and benefits and fixed costs for all of our school and municipal employees. Each year, not all of the budget is fully used, and we call that turn back. So we get a budget approved at town meeting. There's always reasons why a budget may not be fully used. We're not allowed by state laws to kind of carry that over into the next year or use it for other things. So it kind of closes back to free cash. This bar graph shows how much we've closed out each year. So in green for FY22, of the budget that was approved, 2.1 million was closed out. And that does sound like a significant amount of money. It's approximately 2%. So it's a very tight budget, but about 2% of the budget was not used and was turned back. And that compares favorably with the last several years, where it was 2.8, 2.6, 1.6 a couple of years ago. Just a little detail on that 2.1 million. This chart here shows by category where that turn back came from. The largest piece of that was in our benefits and fixed cost account, and that's consistent each year. So 1.2 million of that total came in that category. That is kind of comparable to prior years. It's an appropriate margin for that budget. That's what we have to budget for: our health insurance, our payroll taxes. There's fluctuation that can occur during the year. So the budget is set to accommodate what might occur. And then again, it's just closed out if it's not used. And finally, this bar chart shows the FinCom reserve account. So we set aside $400,000 a year. This shows what we turned back, what's unused. We've been very disciplined in not having to go to that FinCom reserve pretty much unless we need it for snow and ice. We did in FY22 use a bit of it, 140,000 with snow and ice. So we turned back about 265,000 as shown in green. Quickly on snow and ice, this bar chart shows you the history of the town's snow and ice expenses each year for the last several years. FY22 was a little bit higher than normal. We spent $690,000 total. It is the only budget that's legally allowed to be overspent. We set a budget at town meeting. If we need more money during the year, it requires the town administrator to approve that before we overspend. And then we have to cover for that either by transferring funds at town meeting or raising it on our tax recap. And I'll just point this out because I know, again, Select Board member LeBlanc Cummings was on FinCom many years, and the process used to be that we had to come to the Select Board and then go to the Finance Commission to get approval to overspend the snow and ice. And the state a couple of years ago did change that process. And it is now that we just have to go to the town administrator for his approval during the year. But we always keep both the Select Board and the FinCom updated as that occurs during the year. But that was a change in process. The Select Board did a number of years ago increase our original budget from snow and ice up to $450,000. It had historically been much lower at $250,000. Having that increased budget has helped us cover what we're really spending each year. So we're in better shape as far as having funds for what we need for that budget. Just looking at a couple of accounts quickly, the stabilization fund, the town's main savings account. The bar graph shows the balance at the end of each fiscal years for the last several years. We're currently at about $3.8 billion, just about on target for where we are. We have not had to use that account. We thought we might during COVID, but because we got so much outside federal and state funding towards COVID costs, and because there were no cuts to state aid, as I mentioned, we did not have to go to that account. We've been able to maintain this balance. It's a very important component of our credit rating. We now do just a small transfer each year at town meeting, $125,000 into that account. Because this account is on our financial policies, a percent, it's a target, so it does increase as our total spending and revenue goes up. We may want to consider increasing that annual contribution to about $150,000 a year, but in great shape on the stabilization fund. And then free cash. And free cash is a terrible name. It's really something though in Massachusetts we use. It's kind of our retained earning. It's in a sense, we budget to be expenses and revenue balanced. We always, as we show, take in a little bit more revenue. We always don't spend all the expenses. kind of in a way of what's left at the end of the year. Once our staff submits all of our compliance work to Department of Revenue, they certify a number. Our number certified this year was $7.7 million. And I do want to thank our town accountant, Marie O'Leary, and Assistant Treasurer Kathy Foley for getting all our information in so quickly to DOR. It's important for us to have this number as we start the budget year. So the bar graph here shows each year how much is certified in blue, and then what we have used of that at subsequent town meetings in green. So our certification is in line with where it's been the last several years, and that's because we're only using it for capital. We're not applying it to operating budgets in line with the policies. In line with our policies, we're not using the full amount. So each year as we start that revenue and expense closeout, there's a base that's there. In our current year, town meeting used about $3.8 million of free cash for capital, for stabilization. We did use some for snow and ice. We had that one-time transfer of the $300,000 to the aid to the elderly account and the purchase of the American Legion. So it's so helpful that the select board has established budgets that give some flexibility when additional articles come up at town meeting, that things like the American Legion, snow and ice can be handled with free cash and still have the town in a good position. So our financial policies say we should have a certain amount of unallocated or unused free cash to protect the town. That should be about 3.7 million. The bar graph shows what our actual unallocated amount has been each year. And you can see that we're pretty close to target, in very good shape with that. And again, any year that we've gone below that, it's been just towards one-time things, some extra bad winter or some extra capital that needs attention. So that's been fine to use. So in very good shape with free cash to move forward in the 24 budget with the same assumptions that the board has done the last several years. Just quickly, at this time of year, we do a financial forecast. I know this chart is not really easy to see on the screen, but we do project out each year. This is the forecast from last year. Based on what we know for our budget, our debt, our revenue for the next 5 years, what is it looking at? This is built as a model that lets us play with assumptions at the bottom. So we go in and say if health insurance goes up by a certain percent, if our operating budgets increase by a certain percent, what does that do to our bottom line? And if those who have worked with this over the years see and know is that it's really very tight. That this assumption from last year, which showed us balanced or small deficits moving forward, were based on 3% increases to our school and operating budgets. If we plug into this model 5 or 6 or 7% increases to operating budgets, we run into large deficits quite quickly. So it is something that the town has done each fall that kind of gives an overall framework for the budgets each year. We also have to update our Prop 2.5 projections for our tax levy. As we saw, taxes is our biggest revenue. So it's the most important item as we begin our work on the budget. This shows the tax levy calculation from our budget that we took to town meeting. As the board's aware, it's simply a formula. It's a formula that calculates the maximum amount that the town can spend in property taxes, can raise in property taxes. It doesn't say that we have to spend that amount. And in fact, the town never spends the maximum amount, but it is a calculation that we have to work with in the budget process. And just one thing to point out is that one piece of this calculation is new tax growth, taxes from new construction in town. And that item is an estimate throughout the entire budget cycle, and that can be difficult. So we used an estimate at town meeting of $550,000 in new tax revenue. As I showed you earlier, we don't even have that number yet. And we've already had a budget approved for 23. We're a quarter of the year through FY23, and we won't have this final amount until the next month or so. So it's important that we're conservative with that number as we budget and plan. And then when we get the actual number, we update this chart and can use that as you move forward in the FY24 budget. And just quickly on debt, we have a very favorable credit rating, the AAA, the AA1. A lot of those things we talked about earlier play an important part in helping us get there. The past several years have been terrific interest rate environments, and the town has taken advantage of that. We've had a number of large bond sales over the last couple of years. Most recently, this summer, we sold a $56 million bond as the major portion for the new elementary school. In the spring, we had a $7 million bond, which included pieces for the elementary school as well as for the Islington Wentworth new building. Last spring, we sold other bonds, 16 million in 2016 and $7 million in March 2021. And we really experienced some terrific long-term interest rates, and we're able to lock in for 10, 20, or 30-year terms for a lot of the projects that have been going on the last couple of years. With debt, the bar chart here shows our total debt outstanding at the end of each fiscal year. Green shows at the end of FY23, our current year. So obviously with that new school debt we issued, we're seeing a pop-up of the total debt outstanding. But that was because we traditionally had kind of lower levels of debt. We peaked with our high school in about FY17. We had a gradual decline as we're paying off our debt. So we have a peak because we just issued that debt for FY23, and we'll see that continue to drop down now as we go forward in making payments on the bonds. We do have some debt authorized, not yet issued. I just want to point out something. Technically, we show an additional $24 million authorized by town meeting to be issued for the Hanlon School. We will not issue that full amount. That's going to be offset by what we get from the state MSBA program. They're going to pay about $16 million towards that. So it'll be a much smaller number that the town actually issues. And then there was just a few small pieces at the most recent town meeting that we will at some point have to issue debt. But pretty much the large portion of everything approved up until this point has been issued long-term. Our debt is well within our financial policies. This chart shows the amount of our budget that goes towards our debt, particularly the debt within Prop 2.5. The bar in green shows by the financial policies how much debt we should be carrying, and that would be in our current year about $8 million. Then the bar on the right is what we're actually paying, and it's about $3.3 million as shown in blue. So we are well within our policies for debt, and the debt levels are an important component of the credit rating. So this is really the town's in a great shape with debt. The select board, when they do their budgets, always looks on bringing on new debt when other debt ends. And part of that is what's allowed us to stay at these levels. And finally, just your next steps in the budget, as we said, that November 7th meeting will be your tax classification hearing to get the tax rate done and the tax sheet for the current year. Starting in November through February, you're looking at the 24 budget, bringing those pieces on, including operating and capital. I'll just mention with state aid, typically, we're getting our first look from the state on state aid with the governor's budget at the end of January. This year, when a new governor comes in office, they get a 5-week extension. So we won't actually see state aid until the end of February this year. And then again, the target that we have is February 1, when the select board first issues the budget at that point, the municipal budget, the overall summary with all of the pieces, and the proposed capital budget articles. And when that budget comes out, we're going into the FinCom, reviewing all of that with them. So a long cycle with a lot of pieces. Sometimes everyone wants to jump ahead and get to the end, but it needs to develop over time because we're getting a lot of information from outside sources. But the select board will start that process now for 24, starting to see the pieces come in as it moves along, and looking at the individual pieces until February 1. So I know that was a lot of material, but I thank you for that. And again, it's good to touch base on where you are now before you start forward. But we're in good shape for you to continue with kind of the budgets that you've been able to do the last several years. Good budgets to get quality services to the residents with structurally sound budgets.
Thank you, Pam. Just one question related to two elements of the timing. Given the 5-year extension that the governor is allowed to have at our sort of publishing of a book to FinCom or presenting that in early February, I assume we will take a similarly conservative approach to state aid. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, often we would just level fund state aid and work the budget with that assumption. And then as we get new information, we can update that. We might get some indication at some point and you can factor that in. But typically we would level fund and then you could update the budget as that moves forward and you have more information on that.
Great, thank you. Questions from either of my colleagues?
Marianne?
Pam, what is the expected runoff of non-exempt debt as we look at going into 24?
Yes, we had a big runoff in 23. We structured the most recent road bond, $4.5 million road bond that was approved by town meeting, I think in 21, to come online in 23 when the prior road bond was expiring. So there's not a large amount in the 24 budget. There is about 200,000, and that's about what we need for those small items that I showed that were voted at the most recent town meeting. So as far as in particular in what's dropping in the 24 year, not a lot. There's more as we start to move out. I'm sorry, I don't have the slide there. I did include that debt packet in the FYI section of the board's packet. We start to see a little bit of drop off going forward. And with debt, there's a delay from when it's approved to when we issue it and start paying for it. So you could be considering items as part of your 24 budget deliberation that could fit in and slot into debt that's dropping off, future years. Because if you approve it now, by the time we issue it, gets through town meeting, issue it, start paying for it a year later after issuance, it can fit in those outer years. So we do have that schedule, and that is an important schedule for you to see as you incorporate pieces of the budget and want to see what's happening with debt.
Thank you.
Mr. Walsh.
Pam, you're gonna miss doing this for the last time? I'm telling you, boy. I've sent.
I'll miss all of you, but
yeah, this is at least my 9th presentation, and she nails it every single time. So, Pam, I'm sure you're gonna miss this, and you'll be watching when our new finance director comes on to see how well she can follow in your footsteps. But thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Pam. I think that closes out new business as we move into old business. Before I do so, I just want to make note, it's my understanding now that the Westwood Media Center stream is back up on all cable channels. So anybody who is joining us late and is interested in anything that has been discussed before you were able to join, feel free to go to the Westwood Media Center YouTube channel tomorrow morning, and you will be able to see this entire meeting as it has been recorded. So apologies to anyone who is joining us late, and we will continue now with old business. And what we have next in sort of related work is to review our financial policies. And we've talked at length about those in prior meetings. And so I think, Pam did a really wonderful job of highlighting why those policies end up providing such strong guardrails and why we are, very conservative in our budgeting and why we end up with such great ratings from the credit agencies. So I will turn it to Pam to say, is there anything you would like to touch on with respect to the financial policies? And then I'll ask my colleagues if they have any questions.
The board did review these in draft at your last meeting. The policies that we had in place were very good. We did go out though and review them for any changes needed. There were changes needed in administrative areas, like changing the term from selectmen to select board, other things like that. We updated for policies to update what we've been doing with OPEB and items like that. We incorporated policies for the meal and hotel tax revenue. So for things that had changed since they had last been done. And they had not been done since 2014. So one of the items we did put in is that they should be reviewed every 3 years. So I think that will be a much better way for the town to stay up to date. And there may not be necessarily anything that needs to be changed every 3 years, but at least it'd be a review presented to the board for your consideration. That's a much more timely update. So with all of that, we also went out, we always do, and looked at other communities and what they had. We did get some ideas from other communities in 2 areas: risk management, and then also a post-employment benefits policy section, bringing in OPEB and pension kind of into one section. So those were the main changes that we made, and the board did review those at your last meeting. We incorporated any other smaller administrative things that came out of that review. So I think the revisions, have made some strong improvement to the policies, again, particularly with that 3-year requirement. And so if the board was ready, we would ask you to vote approval of the financial policies, and then we can then issue those. We do always keep our policies and what we call our scorecard. Where do we stand against our policies? We put those into all of our budget books, including our town meeting book, and we also put them on the website, and we certainly use those all the time as we undergo credit reviews.
Excellent. So I will turn to my colleagues and ask if anybody has any further comment on the policies as revised and recommended.
I do not, to be honest. I think they did a great job updating them. It's been a while. It's been over 8 years. So thank you, Pam, and your entire team for bringing it to our attention before you go.
I echo that, Pam. I think this is terrific. I'm so glad, especially after the conversation we heard tonight about OPEB. It's so great to see that outlined so that everyone in town can see what our guiding policies are. The scorecard, as always, is there. And so when we talk at town meeting about, the OPEB contribution, the stabilization account contribution, it all harkens back to these policies. And I think it's terrific that you and your staff were able to do this work prior to your retirement, so that we have this in place with our new finance director. So thank you so much for this work. And I'm really pleased that the policy is to revisit them every 3 years going forward. I think that's really smart. So thank you. That is the theme of tonight, Pam. Thank you again.
No, thank you. And I have to say, as I've been cleaning out my office, I saw a scorecard from 10 or 12 years ago, and we did not have all the good grades and checks that we have now. So it's been townwide, very steady progress on all of these different areas. And really now to sit and see where the town is a great reflection on our select board and what you've put forward, with all of the financial action for the town. So glad to get these done. And I do think that 3-year update will make a big difference.
So if we are all in agreement, and it sounds like we are, the policies we can vote and adopt. So I would entertain a motion.
I move that the select board adopt the financial policies as presented this evening.
I second that.
Roll call vote. Ms. LeBlanc Cummings.
Aye.
Mr. Walsh.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
We are staying with the finance theme. And so One of the things that we discussed at our last meeting was, and some of the earlier meetings this year, was the idea of reestablishing a long-range financial planning committee. And the original purpose of that committee was to look at long-term financial issues such as 5-year projections of revenue, expenditures, reserve accounts, the capital budgeting and planning policies, debt management, as we saw a wonderful review of today, health insurance, benefit costs, financial policies, and the impact on residential and commercial tax rates, as well as OPEB. And that has historically been comprised of, or it should be comprised of, select board, school committee, staff in the economic and development arena, the planning board, board of assessors, tax collector, town treasurer, town administration, school administration, and some number of at-large community representatives. We started to have that discussion at our last meeting. We talked about 2 to 4. And I know that each of us has brought forward several names for consideration. I think what we want to do is probably discuss those and maybe make a move to approve those at our next meeting on October, I believe, 24th, right, Chris?
Yes.
Thank you. So I don't think there's any proposed action for us this evening.
Okay.
So that takes us to appointments and reappointments. Chris, would you like to take us through who we've got? And I just will say we have several vacancies that are posted on the town website. We've got Cemetery Commission, the Committee on Disability, the Housing Partnership, Fair Housing Commission, the Pedestrian Bike Safety Commission Committee, and the Westwood Cultural Council. There's also an opening that will be coming available for the Dedham Westwood Water District. And so, Chris, why don't you take us through some of the responsibilities for something like that in case there is someone wishing to be appointed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the debt under the, I'm just going to go by what we have here. So under the Dedham Westwood Water District Commission opening, this would be a member who would work with the district. They would establish rates. They would look at plans for capital improvements throughout the district. The district is comprised of both Westwood and Dedham. Work with the staff and work with the executive director there. This is a significant role. This is the water source for the community. It is an important role, and we certainly hope that we get someone who's very interested in that and to continue on the good work that the representatives from Westwood have made, including Mr. Power.
Thank you. So there's no other appointments this evening. Just the announcement of Mr. Kara's end of his term, which expires on December 31st. So we would really like to have someone who is interested in serving in this role with 2 other residents on this 6-member board.
Yeah, if may I jump in, Rob?
You certainly may.
Probably the thing that most people are always asking is, what is the commitment? So the commitment to be on the Dedham Westwood Water Commission, you're one of 6, 3 from Westwood, 3 from Dedham. It meets twice a month on the 1st and 3rd Tuesday of every month. So just in case anyone's out there interested, that is the time commitment that's necessary. My understanding is their meetings are not super long. They're not as long as the planning board, and they're not as short as some of the other commissions, but they do meet twice a month, at least during 10 months out of the year.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that clarification. Okay, so that takes us to the approval of minutes. I know I had a couple of comments. I believe, Mary Ann, you may have had a couple of comments from what I heard from Tish. So I think this is probably something that we defer to our meeting on the 24th. Anybody have any issue with that?
Yep.
Very good.
Fine.
Okay, as mentioned earlier, before we adjourn, Pam, one last time, thank you. And I hope there's a great turnout for the event at the Public Library on October 20th at 4 p.m. Certainly, there should be many people dropping by to
Thank
say
you.
thank you and wish you well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I just may.
You may.
Just want to say, Pam, on behalf of the team, to you and your team, your leadership, your professionalism, and the confidence that everyone has in you will be missed, but never forgotten. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you for the support you've given all the team, the coaching you provided all of us. Like I said, you will be missed, but you will not be forgotten. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
You certainly may.
Ms. Dukeman, it has been a pleasure working with you since I don't want to say how far back.
Yes.
When I was in your three seats, every time I became chairman, it seemed we had a mid-year cut in state aid. This lady saved us each time. You will be missed, both personally and professionally, but we wish you nothing but good things in your retirement.
Thank you so much.
Pat, she's not going anywhere. She's still staying in Westwood.
Thank you. I've enjoyed working with all of you. And as I said, the town has really benefited by the quality of our residents who step up to the select board. Pat and I were reminiscing the other day about how many different members have been on the board, and it's just always been a great board and a great team who do such great work for the community.
If truth be told, when I got on the select board, I had hair and it was dark. Okay, so let's put it in perspective. But Pam, you've been great to work with through the years.
I have to say, Mr. Hearn, but for the fact I've seen the pictures, I wouldn't believe it.
Don't blame you, Mr. Walsh.
All right, I will look to see, is there anybody from the press looking for any comment? Seeing none. Our next meeting, as has been mentioned a couple times, is October 24th, 2022 on Zoom at 6 p.m. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And seconded.
A roll call vote. Ms. LeBlanc Cummings.
Aye.
Mr. Walsh.
Aye.
Now, if I don't say aye, I guess you still have the votes to adjourn and we actually let Pam go. Huh? Okay, I'll say aye as well.
All right. Thank you.
We are
Thank you.
adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Pam.